Dr. Imade Swagana as Director of Postgrad IKN Toraja or Institut Agama Kristen Negeri Toraja and Vice Director. Honorable to Mr. Dr. Salman Pamantur as a Committee Chairman of Public Lecture today. Honorable to Biro Head in Institut Agama Kristen Negeri Toraja. Honorable to all of Dean of Faculty, to all of Vice Dean Faculty, to all of Lecturer, and to all of Education personnel in Institut Agama Kristen Negeri Toraja. Honorable to Institut Keguruan dan Alkitab Teologi. Honorable to Sekolah Tinggi Teologi KIBAID Makale. Honorable to Sekolah Tinggi Teologi MAMASA. To all of invited guests by on-site or via live stream. Dear students and all of audiences. In this special event, we have several agendas, so allow me to read several sequences for our agendas. The first agenda is opening and praying. The second agenda is singing Indonesia Raya. The third agenda is opening speech. The fourth is public lecture, and the last is closing and praying. Well, now we start in the first agenda is praying, and now I would like to Pendeta Darius, Magister of Theology. The floor is yours.
Terima kasih. Before I pray, and then I would like to say I will pray in Indonesia. So, mari kita berdoa. Ya Tuhan Allah Bapa kami di sorga, kami bersyukur kepadamu pada pagi hari ini. Terima kasih untuk kasih dan pimpinan Tuhan yang tak pernah berhenti dalam hidup kami. Ketika Tuhan memberikan kami kekuatan kesehatan yang baik hari ini, itu karena kasih karunia Allah bagi kami. Saat ini Tuhan kami ada di sini merupakan karunia Allah. Ketika Engkau masih mengizinkan kami untuk menikmati segala yang Tuhan izinkan untuk kami alami, kami akan mengikuti kuliah umum pada hari ini. Berkatilah kami semua, berkati para panitia yang ada, berikan kekuatan kepada mereka. Pembicara kami dari Jerman juga Tuhan berkati hamba-Mu untuk memberkati kami semua hari ini. Lewat materi dalam kuliah umum hari ini Tuhan, kami dibekali dengan baik untuk kami pakai dalam hidup kami dan untuk kami pakai melayani Tuhan dalam sepanjang kehidupan ini. Berkatilah kami semua, seluruh rangkaian kegiatan kami sepanjang hari ini kami hanya serahkan ke dalam tangan pengasihan Tuhan, dan doa ini kami naikkan, kami awaskan di dalam nama Tuhan kami Yesus Kristus. Amin.
Thank you for Pendeta Darius, Magister of Theology. May God bless always. The second agenda is singing Indonesia Raya, who will be led by Miss Irma. She is the one of student in Institut Agama Kristen Negeri Toraja. The floor is yours. And I would like to invite all of students to stand up. Sit down, please. The third agenda is opening speech by Rektor Institut Agama Kristen Negeri Toraja, Mr. Dr. Jonita Pingu. The floor is yours.
Thank you for this beautiful moment. Good morning.
Good morning.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Shalom. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya. Salam kebajikan. Because my English is very lacking, so that I will deliver my speech in writing, ya, dalam bentuk tulisan. Jadi saya akan membaca, ya. I want to deliver my speech in writing. Dear Honorable Vice Rector of IKN Toraja, Vice Rector of Academic Affairs and Institutional Development, Dr. Ismail Bandaringgi, Master Theology, Vice Rector of Administration and Finance, Dr. Abraham Seretan Bulungan, MSI, and Vice Rector of Student Affairs and Cooperation, Dr. Setrianto Tarapa. Dear Honorable Keynote Speaker, Reverend Professor Dr. Volker Ustad, welcome to Toraja land, especially in the state Christian institutional. Dear Honorable Dean and coordinators of study program, dear Honorable all participants and the achievement and secretary of committee this program. Peace be upon us and good morning. Starting this speech, I invite us to graduate to God Almighty for His grace. So today we can gather and meet online and offline to carry out the public lecture of Toraja State Christian Institute IKN Toraja under the theme Pandemonium Pandemethics, Pantopia, what is in a word. Ladies and gentlemen, IKN Toraja as a college considers service, devotion, and research on community needs such an integral part of its existence. It is consistent with the college's mission as a place to study, provide, and address the needs of society. In different words, the college ought to reflect sensitivity to the context of needs of its community. The public lecture is expected to develop the academic abilities of students, lecturers, educational staff, IKN Toraja alumni, and the public about comprehensive and correct understanding of what pandemonium, pandemetics, and Pantopia are. This is public lecture can be used as a place to establish cooperation as well, improve English language skills, and introduce speakers from abroad who are experts in the field of study to deliver it. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing my speech, I would like to thank you to our keynote speaker, Reverend Professor Dr. Volker Kuster from Mainz University, Germany. Thank you for your coming in this IKN Toraja family. Thank you to all participants for their attending this public lecture. Thank you to all the committee members who have prepared and implemented this event. We strongly believe this public lecture is beneficial for development of three dharma of IKN Toraja. What's the three dharma program tinggi IKN Toraja? The first, services, menyangkut soal pelayanan, and the second, studies, pendidikan, pembelajaran, and the third, about research. So, and finally, on behalf of the leadership of IKN Toraja, by offering graduate and once again, and finally, on behalf of the leadership of IKN Toraja, by offering gratitude and invoking God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, I declare the IKN Toraja public lecture on March 20, 20 and 23 under the theme Pandemonium Pandemethics Pantopia, what is in the world, is officially opened. I wish you a prosperous public lecture. God bless and thank you.
Thank you very much to the Rector of Institut Agama Kristen Negeri Toraja, Mr. Dr. Junita Piku, for the opening speech. May it useful for all of us. The fourth agenda is public lecture. It is now pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. He is from University Mainz, Germany. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Reverend Professor Dr. A.C. Volker Kuster. Give applause. And our moderator is Mrs. Icenovita Triana Lolon M.A. She is the one lecturer of Institut Agama Kristen Negeri Toraja. Mr. Volker Kuster and Mrs. Icenovita, the floor is yours.
aman. Itu kosong juga di sana satu ya.
Good morning, everyone. How are you today? How are you today? Saya pikir semua orang yang hadir saat ini sangat excited because this is the first seminar that on site with a speaker from abroad, because we have already conducted the previous seminar, but it's online, so it's very. I think every people here is very excited because can meet directly with a professor today. Well, today our topic in our public lecture is Pandemonium Pandemethics Pantopia. What's in a word? Jadi istilah ini saya pikir masih sangat asing untuk sebagian besar yang ada di dalam ruangan ini, dan itulah yang kemudian menarik kita untuk hadir to know, untuk mengetahui apa di balik term atau istilah yang ada di tema kita pada saat ini. Dan saat ini saya akan memperkenalkan biodata singkat dari Bapak Pendeta Profesor Dr. Volker Kuster, Reverend Professor Dr. H.C. Volker Kuster. He's from Heidelberg, Germany. Yes. And for education and career, pendidikan, beliau adalah seorang profesor comparative religion, perbandingan agama dan misiologi di Johannes Gutenberg University Mainz in Germany. Until now, since 2012, dari tahun 2012 sampai saat ini, beliau sebagai profesor di sana. Dan kemudian dari tahun 2022 sampai 2012, beliau sebagai profesor Cross Cultural Theology at the Protestant Theological University di Belanda. Selanjutnya, beliau aktif sebagai peneliti, researcher in intercultural theology at the Inter-University Institute for Missiological and Ecumenical Research, penelitian ekumene. And then beliau di pendidikan dan karirnya dimulai dari tahun 1982 sampai saat ini. Dan kemudian untuk teaching, jadi beliau sudah banyak melakukan supervisi pembimbingan kepada banyak mahasiswa, baik itu dari program sarjana, pasca sarjana, doktoral sampai profesor. Dan kemudian beliau sering diundang invited lectures and contribution to some konferensi dan juga di international seminar berbasis teologi. Kemudian beliau sering diundang as the visiting professor, mungkin kalau kita DLB ya istilahnya, sering diundang untuk memberikan kuliah. Dan selanjutnya beliau aktif di jurnal Exchange Journal of Missiological and Ecumenical Research since 2001, and also being an editor of the academic textbook series Theological Classroom Matters, first volume in preparation. And then awards and grants, penghargaan yang telah diterima oleh beliau di tahun 2021, Honorary Doctorate University of Lund, Sweden. And also dari tahun 2018 sampai 2019 sebagai Research Professor of Intercultural Theology in the Center of World Christianity at New York Theological Seminary. Di tahun 2015 di University of Divinity, Melbourne, in Australia. Wow! So it's very, very amazing. Our professor is go around the world to sharing his knowledge and semua ilmu yang dimiliki oleh beliau betul-betul sesuai dengan jurusan yang sedang digeluti oleh beliau saat ini di misiologi. Beliau seorang profesor in missiology, right? And then award di tahun 1982 of the Minister of Culture for Social Engagement. Jadi beliau mulai Education and Career 1982 dan sekaligus mendapatkan award di tahun itu, Award of the Minister of Culture for Social Engagement. Kemudian a field of research, area yang beliau biasa melakukan penelitian di bagian intercultural theology and hermeneutics, contextual theology and art in the third world, ecumenical theology, theology of mission, theology of religions, inter-religion dialogue and comparative religion. And the key publication, jadi banyak publikasi-publikasi oleh beliau di sini sangat banyak. Saya akan membacakan the current publication, the Many Faces of Jesus Christ, Many Faces of Jesus Christ, Intercultural Christology, London, SCM Press, and Mary Knoll, New York, Orbis Books 2001, and also I see the book Third God or Terror. Yeah. Ada buku beliau di sana. Di sini ada God or Terror, Ethics and Aesthetics in Context of Conflict and Reconciliation, Sheffield, in Sheffield, UK. And also a Protestant Theology of Passion, Minju. Is the word is from Korean, Minjung. Okay, Minjung Theology Revisited. Okay. And Leiden, and also Sweden Pancasila. Wow. Sweden Pancasila und Fundamentalismus Christi Kunst in Indonesia. So it was published in Germany. Ya, jadi dipublikasi dalam bahasa Jerman. And then Christian art in Asia, yesterday and today. The Christian Story, 5 Asian Artists Today, Museum of Biblical Art in New York and London. Okay, maybe that's all about our professor today. So sebenarnya masih banyak sekali. There are many awards and publication and about the career of our professor today, but I can't read all this, but I will tell you later. Banyak sekali. Ada 50. Pokoknya banyak sekali, Pak. Okay, so we will have our professor today to bring the material about our topic today. Dan saya berharap tadi Pak Rektor katakan ini adalah tempat untuk kita improve our skill in English, meningkatkan kemampuan kita berbahasa Inggris. Pergunakan kesempatan ini sebaik mungkin dan bertanya kepada beliau karena kita tidak tahu ke depan apakah kita akan bertemu lagi dengan beliau di kesempatan yang sama. Dan I hope ketika kita masuk di question and answer nanti Bapak Ibu dan adik-adik mahasiswa bisa try to speak in English. Okay. So that's all our professor today. I invite you to deliver your material today about Pandemonium Pandemethics, Pantopia, what's in our place.
Good morning. First of all, I want to thank the rector and also our moderator for the warm words of welcome. Thank you for inviting me to your university, and special thanks also to Dr. Ibrahim, who gave me a crash course in Toraja culture during the weekend. I have been traveling Indonesia many times, but this is my first visit to Toraja. I always wanted to come here, so now was the chance to learn more about your very specific culture, so I'm happy to be here. Today, I want to share with you my thoughts on how to look as a contextual and intercultural theologian at the pandemic. As the moderator already said, we all have experienced 2 years of only meeting online in the classroom. So we are all very happy that we can be back in person and see each other and give each other hands and share personally. When it became clear to the broader public at the beginning of March 2020 that the new coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 was much more contagious than previous strains, and that we were on the precipice of a global pandemic, I quickly became convinced that we cannot teach contextual and intercultural theology without responding to the virus. So for me as a professor, that was a lot of work because I had to change all my curriculums and syllabus. But I also had students who have never been on the campus because it was their first semester, so they only could join online. So you all know how important student life is and to meet each other, but that was not possible for them, only online. Yeah? So what I did is in my lecture classes, I split them up in virtual rooms, and then I went from room to room to talk with all of them in smaller groups. Yeah, so we all had to learn to communicate in very different ways. However, at the same time, I also became aware that it was not only us who were trying to interpret the virus was also interpreting us. The hermeneutical circle between text and context suddenly turned into a two-way street. In the last third of the 20th century, liberation theologies denounced poverty and oppression. But now, suddenly, the virus was exposing the injustices of global neoliberal capitalism, as well as the intersectionality of different forms of discrimination. So I started to revisit liberation theologies and explore what tools they had developed to respond theologically Okay, let's do that. And KERJA had already published a relecture of liberation theologies in the light of the global economic crisis, the Occupy movement and the Arab Spring in 2011.
Iya, jadi tahun 2012 Kuliah ini salah satu teolog Asia dan juga George Rieger menerbitkan buku atau tinjauan mereka yang berjudul Occupy Religion yang meninjau ulang terhadap teologi pembebasan dalam terang krisis ekonomi global dan juga bicara tentang Arab Spring tahun 2011 yang kemudian menghasilkan begitu banyak gejolak di Timur Tengah.
So the idea of Kuliah Umum Iakn is religion have become part of the neoliberal capitalist system. So we have to liberate them. Like the Occupy movement, we have to occupy religion to bring back the liberating force of religions.
Iya, jadi di sini agama menjadi sebuah gerakan yang juga sekaligus membebaskan agama. Saya teringat ini bukan terjemahan, tapi saya teringat tulisan membebaskan agama dan agama yang membebaskan.
So my idea was the way they responded to the economic crisis can be helpful also to look now at the health crisis, at the pandemic.
Iya, jadi sekarang agama bisa melihat krisis ekonomi dan terlebih bagaimana kaitannya dengan pandemi.
During my own march through the major progressive theological movements of the last third of the 20th century, Latin American liberation theology, Black theology, Minjung theology, women's of color theologies, ecofeminism, post-colonial theology, as well as new political theology, feminist theology and socio-historical exegesis in the West. I identified the option for the poor, the focus on civil rights and society, and the stance against social injustice, racism, sexism and ecological awareness, as well as narrative, post-colonial, intersectional theories and methods as tools which equip us well with critical thinking to respond to the pandemic.
Iya, pada paruh ketiga abad ke-20 ada begitu banyak lahir pemikiran teologi, misalnya teologi pembebasan di Amerika Latin, teologi hitam, teologi Minjung yang menjadi fokus disertasi profesor, kemudian feminism theology, ekofeminis, postkolonial teologi atau teologi postkolonial, teologi politik dan seterusnya yang berbicara mengenai pilihan preferential option for the poor. Jadi keberpihakan kepada orang miskin, hak-hak sipil masyarakat, menentang ketidakadilan, rasisme, seksisme, ekologi, dan metode-metode penafsiran yang memperlihatkan bagaimana merespon konteks terlebih pemikiran kritis untuk merespon pandemi.
So the basic idea is how can we use progressive theological resources to respond to the challenges of the pandemic.
Iya, jadi yang paling penting ialah bagaimana menggunakan teori-teori dari teologi progresif, beliau menyebutnya teologi progresif, untuk merespon pandemi yang menjadi konteks kekinian.
And this morning I will do this with explaining 3 words: pandemonium, pandemetics, and Pantopia.
Berkaitan dengan itu, dalam kuliah umum kali ini, Profesor akan mengungkapkan istilah dan itu merupakan bagian respon terhadap pandemi, yaitu Pandemonium, Pandemethics, and Pantopia.
Let me summarize the basic idea before I go into detail. Pandemonium describes the context, the situation that we experience in the pandemic. So people are referring sometimes to apocalyptic images to describe what is happening to them in the pandemic.
Iya, jadi di Pandemonium itu menggambarkan bagaimana respon kita terhadap konteks, dan biasanya orang mencari referensi atau rujukan pada teks-teks apokaliptik untuk merespon pandemi itu sendiri.
Pandemetics is an attempt to develop an ethics from an intercultural perspective to respond and act in the context of the pandemic.
Pandemetics sendiri semacam akten, sikap, yang ini lebih bicara pada etika, bagaimana merespon pandemi itu.
And then Pantopia is a new word I invented to find an alternative to what is called new normal.
Iya, dan Pantopia itu merupakan kata yang atau istilah yang baru yang Prof sampaikan, itu semacam bagaimana kita
Pantopia is an alternative vision against what they call now the new normal.
Oke, jadi itu semacam istilah yang kalau mau dibilang kontra terhadap new normal. Ya.
So all the three words, as you can see, have the first syllable pan from pandemic. Yeah? Pandemonium, Pandemethics, Pantopia. So it's a word play actually.
Iya, jadi ada, kalau Anda perhatikan ada kata pan di depan setiap istilah-istilah itu. Pandemonium, Pandemethics, Pantopia.
So I begin with pandemonium. Since the millennium in the West seems to have been in a crisis mode of thinking, even though we were exempted by the so-called millennium bug, in the 1990s the West lived in euphoria, believing that neoliberal capitalism and democracy had won, and broad sections of its societies led an affluent lifestyle, many beyond their means.
Sejak milenium ini, di Barat tampaknya terjadi krisis pemikiran, meskipun mereka sudah dibebaskan dari apa yang disebut dengan, saya sendiri mengerti, bug milenium. Pada tahun 90-an, di Barat terjadi semacam ekspektasi atau euforia yang percaya bahwa kapitalisme dan demokrasi neoliberal itu memenangkan atau bisa memberikan gaya hidup yang makmur bagi sebagian besar masyarakatnya. Tapi ternyata hal itu tidak demikian.
So some conservative American philosophers and political scientists spoke about the end of history. That means the Soviet Union and communism have failed, so now the West has won.
Ya, jadi itu diperkuat lagi dengan runtuhnya Uni Soviet, kolapsnya komunisme, dan sepertinya itu memberi jalan yang sangat mulus bagi West, Barat, dan kapitalisme.
And because of this, they also said that the term third world doesn't make sense anymore.
Ya, jadi sepertinya itu memberi
So we have been used to speak of first world, yeah, that's the West. Second world, that's the communist bloc. And then the third world is Africa and Asia, Latin America. Now you have a very famous conference here in Indonesia in 1955, Bandung Conference, the Asia-Africa Conference, yeah, where these states said we want to have an alternative between these two power blocks, West and East.
Ya, jadi pembagian dunia itu blok barat, blok timur yang mewakili sistem demokrasi, sistem ekonomi dan ideologi. Ada barat dengan kapitalisme, lalu kemudian di timur itu dianggap sebagai blok yang mengusung komunisme. Tetapi kemudian pada tahun 1956, ini sejarah saya agak sedikit kacau, 5556 di Bandung ada konferensi Asia Afrika sebagai alternatif. Jadi negara-negara yang terhimpun dalam non-blok itu tidak memihak salah satu blok itu sendiri, tetapi menjadi alternatif ketiga.
Well, I think what I just sketched, this idea of the end of history, is a Western perspective. Because communism survived in China as a form of communist state capitalism. And in Korea and Taiwan, the Cold War was never over.
Iya, jadi walaupun komunisme itu runtuh, tapi sebenarnya ada pergeseran ke Cina, dan sedangkan Korea, Taiwan itu belum diketahui apakah dia 100% itu tepat atau bagaimana.
So my argument is we have been living for a long time in this matrix of East against the West, and somewhere in between was the global South. Then the West said after the fall of the Soviet Empire, we have won, and now we have the war in Ukraine, and we see all this was a Western perspective.
Sepertinya ada matriks antara Barat dan Timur.
So this is the world we live in, and this is the world that's also important to understand as a context when we deal with the pandemic.
Dan itu membuat kita harus mengerti itu sebagai konteks kita di mana kita hidup, tinggal dalam merespon pandemi. Mempengaruhi. Jadi kalau kita di Barat tentu lain, di Timur lain, dan kalau kita sebagai non-blok juga pasti berbeda.
So I'm a scholar from the West, but I have been also trained in Korea by Minjung theologians. So I'm trying to negotiate between the different contexts.
Ya, jadi profesor itu lahir studi besar di budaya Barat, tetapi kemudian juga dia melakukan penelitian di Minjung di Korea, sehingga mau tidak mau dia kemudian bagaimana menegosiasi konteks yang berbeda.
So, if I look at my own context, then I see people are very irritated. First, there was the economic crisis. Then there was the refugee crisis because of the war in Syria. Then there was the pandemic. And now we have the war in Ukraine.
Iya, jadi ada beberapa konteks, ada krisis ekonomi, kemudian Syria, dan pandemi, dan sekarang perang Ukraina Rusia.
And the war on terror by the United States made a big impact also in the global South. But if you look at what's happening is, they bombed Afghanistan, but they spared Saudi Arabia, even though Saudi Arabia, most of the terrorists came from.
Iya, kalau kita belajar dari sejarah kita, Amerika itu kemudian melihat Arab dan Afghanistan itu sebagai tempat munculnya terorisme.
Yeah, so what we experience in world politics at the moment is that all the clear camps that we have made don't function anymore. Yeah, so people are very confused.
Kalau kita memperhatikan, sepertinya itu sebenarnya membuat masyarakat atau banyak orang menjadi bingung.
So during the pandemic, governments were talking about the war against the virus. So they were using war metaphors to say we have to combat this unknown pandemic that is challenging us. Oh yeah, during the pandemic, all of a sudden we were using these war metaphors. War. First we spoke about war against terror. Now we speak about the war against the virus.
Ya, kita selama masa pandemi ada metafora perang yang tadinya melawan teror, sekarang itu dikenakan untuk juga perang melawan pandemi. Ya, di 2020-2021 yang lalu kita selalu mendengar istilah perang melawan pandemi.
And then, while the pandemic was still on its height in February 22, the war in Ukraine started, and then people went back from talking about war against the pandemic to the war metaphors against Russia.
Ya, lalu kemudian pergeseran lagi. Yang tadinya perang melawan pandemi, lalu bergeser menjadi perang untuk melawan Rusia karena Rusia dianggap menyerang Ukraina.
And what we can also see in this crisis is that this democracy has become very vulnerable in the US with Trump, but also in the European Union with states like Hungary, in India, also South Korea, Indonesia, South Africa. Young democracies are struggling.
Ya, sepertinya ini menjadi rentan kalau kita memperhatikan semua yang sudah disampaikan tadi. Misalnya India, Indonesia, Korea, dan bahkan beberapa negara-negara yang baru saja memulai kehidupan demokrasi.
So I gave you a short political sketch of the global context, and my argument is that we have, as Christian theologians, to call counter stories to the narratives of empire, neoliberal capitalism, globalization, and fundamentalism of all sorts. Okay. At the margins of the COVID-19 pandemic, religious groups refer to apocalyptic thought patterns in response. The pandemic was a sign of God's wrath, and no hygienic concept or vaccine could help, only prayer. The Christian right in the US reinforced deep-seated racist sentiments in Asian hate campaigns. Yeah, you may remember Trump said that's the Chinese virus. So there was a lot of violence in the United States against everybody who had an Asian face. In Europe, even some of my doctoral students from Korea get harassed. It was not as bad as in the United States, but still. So it was, the pandemic got a racist overtone. Also, in the onslaught against the Black Lives Matter movement, you may remember, you may have heard about George Floyd, who was killed by a white policeman. He was infected by COVID-19. He was a poor black person. And we have learned that in the United States, more black people died of COVID than white people. And that has to do with the fact that they have not access to medical aid, that they live in difficult circumstances, many people in small rooms. So what we see is there is a connection between the pandemic, political issues, racism, and so on.
Okay, I will continue. Okay. Pikiran kelompok agama pandemi pada masa pandemi ini mengacu pada pemikiran apokaliptik pada pola sebagai tanggapan. Pandemi adalah tanda nyata dari murka Tuhan, dan ini konsep yang tidak higienis, dan kita melihat bahwa vaksin bisa membantu, namun hanya doa. Lalu pada hak Kristen di Amerika Serikat diperkuat dengan dudukan sentimen rasis dalam kampanye kebencian Asia dan serangan gencar terhadap Black Lives Matter. Kemudian gerakan ini menjadi perubahan menjadi kekerasan kejam. And then teks pada apokaliptik dalam Alkitab merespon pada krisis dan secara terstruktur disesuaikan menanggapi krisis ini.
So I want to quote South African colored theologian Alan Boesak, who was in prison under the apartheid system, and he wrote a commentary on the Apocalypse of John. And I quote a short part from this book. Apocalypse literally means revelation. Things which have been disguised are debunked, laid open, revealed. Writings of this sort emerge always in times of persecution and suffering, in the transition from one epoch of history to another. They are supposed to consolation, encouragement, and inspiration for humans in times of extreme pressure.
Oke, dalam Markus 13 atau Wahyu adalah reaksi terhadap teror Rom. Pada teolog kulit Afrika Selatan membaca ulang kitab Wahyu dan perspektifnya pengalaman penjara di bawah resim apartheid Afrika Selatan. Apokalips secara harafiah berarti wahyu, hal-hal yang telah disemarkan dan dibantah, dibuka, terungkap. Tulisan-tulisan ini semacam selalu muncul pada masa-masa penuntutan dan penderitaan di masa transisi satu zaman sejarah ke zaman yang lainnya. Lalu mereka seharusnya menjadi penghibur, dorongan dan inspirasi untuk manusia pada saat tekanan ekstrim.
So that's why I started my lecture on Pandemonium with an analysis of what we call in theology the signs of the times. So war, pandemic, all that are signs that the biblical text on Apocalypse regard as a sign for the end of the times.
Oke, jadi itulah sebabnya saya membuka lecture ini atau kuliah ini dengan Apocalypse.
But the interesting thing, if you listen to this quote from Alan Busak that he has written in the prison, is that there is hope in the middle of pandemonium. That there will come something new after the apocalypse.
Iya, kalau memperhatikan apa yang disampaikan oleh Alan Busak ini seorang teolog dari Afrika Selatan. Dia memakai apokalips itu semacam sesuatu yang baru, karena dia melihat pandemi juga sebagai bagian dari apa yang disebut dengan pandemonium atau kekacauan itu. Jadi ada teks semacam teks apokaliptik membuka selubung dalam masa-masa penderitaan itu. Perlu ada penghiburan bagi mereka yang menderita akibat pandemi.
So while the fundamentalist groups within Christianity say the apocalypse is the end of the times, I understand the apocalypse as a challenge and as a period of change. And that's why I'm trying to develop a Pantopia, a new future after the pandemic that is not just going back to the injustices before the pandemic. So the new normal for me is a metaphor for just going on with the injustice in the world.
Ya, jadi Pantopia itu semacam sesuatu yang baru melampaui new normal. Jadi kalau new normal tidak hanya di Pantopia kita tidak sedang hanya bicara ketidakadilan sebelum pandemi, tetapi juga setelah pandemi.
Okay, I try to summarize this first point from Pandemonium in 2 sentences. So my idea is, as contextual theologians, we have to learn to read the signs of the times. So what is happening in our world?
Ya, sebagai seorang teolog atau yang berpikir bagaimana melakukan teologi kontekstual, maka tidak bisa tidak kita harus memperhatikan konteks sekitar kita.
And in this particular case of the pandemic, it's even the virus that is pointing out these injustices.
Ya, dan dalam konteks pandemi, maka pandemi itu sekarang membawa keluar atau kemudian menampilkan ketidakadilan yang
And while the majority of the people in the world have been suffering from the pandemic, there have been people who have been making a lot of money out of the pandemic.
Ya, perhatikan bahwa pandemi ini di satu sisi sangat membuat banyak orang menderita, tetapi pada waktu yang bersamaan membuat juga beberapa orang itu memiliki uang yang banyak dari pandemi.
Because they were speculating in the stock market, yeah, they were making money.
Melihatnya secara global. Pertama-tama apa yang menjadi isu-isu etika di Barat dan bagaimana itu secara juga bersamaan kemudian secara global dibicarakan.
So Western pandemic ethics were preoccupied. If there are more people who need a respirator than respirators, so who gets the respirator?
Iya, jadi ada 3 isu utama terkait dengan etika pandemi atau pandemi. Yang pertama itu trias. Trias itu ialah keputusan dari dokter untuk memutuskan dari sekian banyak orang yang terinfeksi, siapa yang membutuhkan terkait dengan respirator, alat bantu pernapasan, siapa yang harus mendapatkan alat bantu itu.
And the sole criterion for this decision is who has the best chances of survival.
Dan yang kedua ialah kriterianya siapa yang memiliki peluang terbaik untuk bertahan hidup dalam isu yang pertama tadi. Kriterianya ialah siapa yang paling memiliki peluang untuk bertahan hidup.
But of course it's a very difficult decision for the doctors to make, so the politicians did all to avoid that they would have to make this decision.
Ya, jadi ini merupakan keputusan yang tidak gampang, tidak mudah ya.
Secondly, the second issue is what we called herd immunity. Herd immunity means when many people get ill and become healthy again, then there is a natural immunity within the population.
Iya, yang kedua itu herd immunity, kekebalan bersama. Saya kira tidak perlu dijelaskan karena saudara-saudara sudah biasa mendengar kekebalan kelompok atau bersama itu ya.
So populist politicians like Donald Trump in the US, Boris Johnson in Great Britain, or Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, but also the Swedish government propagated herd immunity just to be able to carry on with the liberal lifestyle and the capitalist economy.
Ya, jadi rupanya di belakang pemikiran itu, kekebalan kelompok atau herd immunity, ada Donald Trump, Boris Johnson ini mantan Perdana Menteri Inggris, dan Jair Bolsonaro dari Swedia, mengusung kekebalan kelompok sebagai strategi yang bisa atau mampu menjaga agar ekonomi tetap berjalan dengan baik dan kemudian tidak akan membatasi kebebasan individu.
But there was a lot of protest against this by people who say the state has a responsibility to protect the well-being of its citizens. So that's why they advocated an ethics of care, and they opted for restrictions and even lockdowns.
Hal ini rupanya dilemahkan dengan banyaknya suara-suara kritis dari mereka yang melihat bahwa lebih penting melindungi kehidupan dan kesejahteraan warga negara, terutama mereka yang punya resiko, apa istilahnya itu yang berisiko, artinya orang-orang yang ada istilahnya pada waktu itu, dan orang-orang yang berusia lansia. Jadi orang yang punya misalnya sakit jantung, diabetes, mereka itu yang diutamakan.
So the old people and the people who had chronic illnesses were the most vulnerable. So the position was we have to protect them, and then other people have to be restricted in their freedoms.
Ya, jadi itu yang kemudian Prof sampaikan bahwa lebih penting untuk menjaga bagaimana supaya mereka yang usia lanjut, mereka yang rentan dengan penyakit bawaan itu yang lebih layak untuk ditolong.
And the third ethical issue in the West was what I call the vaccine complex.
Dan yang ketiga, apa yang Prof sebut sebagai kompleksitas dari vaksin.
So long before we actually had vaccines, there was a discussion how to distribute what at the beginning were certainly limited doses.
Jauh sebelum banyak vaksin itu tersedia, yang dibicarakan ialah bagaimana mendistribusikan vaksin yang pada awal-awalnya itu masih sangat terbatas jumlahnya.
In most countries, risk groups and medical personnel were identified as primary categories.
Sebagian besar negara, kelompok beresiko dan tenaga medis itu diidentifikasi sebagai mereka yang harus paling pertama diprioritaskan. Makanya tenaga medis duluan divaksin lab.
And then afterwards it should go by age groups.
Kemudian urutannya berdasarkan kelompok usia.
Then there was the question, should there be compulsory vaccination? Should there be vaccination campaigns for children?
Pertanyaan utama terkait dengan vaksinasi ini ialah haruskah ini berlaku hanya untuk mereka yang rentan atau memiliki risiko dan profesi tertentu seperti tenaga medis, ataukah ini untuk semua orang?
And even should there be a right to choose which vaccine type one gets? Because in the beginning, as you know, there was BioNTech and Moderna and other vaccines, and they were supposed to be different in their impact, for instance.
Iya, kita tahu ada begitu banyak jenis vaksin, ada Moderna, ada AstraZeneca, dan kita di Indonesia ini yang buatan Chinese vaccine.
Yes, exactly.
Most in Indonesia.
Yeah, so you see, you mentioned the Chinese vaccine. When my doctoral student wanted to come to Germany, then she first had to she had a Chinese vaccine, but she had to got a shot by Moderna, in order to be even allowed to travel.
I want to share my experience with my other fellow when we studied in Korea. Our vaccine, China, especially China vaccine, did not recognized by Korean government. So
exactly.
we have to get any vaccine, Moderna or AstraZeneca.
Yeah, that was the same case in Germany. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
When I invited my doctoral student to come to Germany for some time to do research. Then first she had to get Moderna vaccine, even though she was vaccinated with Chinese. So if I look, so this was the discussion in Europe. Now if I look in the room, I think your Indonesian experience was quite different. And you already also shared your own experience. And that's why I come now to what I call intercultural pandemetics. So pandemetics is also a new word that tries to look at an alternative vision on ethics in the context of the pandemic.
Yang selanjutnya, Prof akan bicara tentang pandemetics lintas budaya. Mungkin pandemic ini semacam etika yang dibangun bersama.
Actually, I think in the global south, so also in Indonesia, these discussions I just sketched must have sounded merely hypothetical, if not cynical. If you have less respirators for the whole country than one German provincial hospital, people die in your hands anyway. So the African state Mali has only 2 respirators for the whole population.
Di negara-negara bagian selatan, diskusi mengenai jika Anda memiliki lebih banyak respirator untuk seluruh negara dari
Even though many North Atlantic countries paid into the vaccine fund COVAX that was supposed to supply countries which could not afford the expensive vaccines, the very same countries bought up all the available doses for themselves. Yeah? So what was happening, European states paid to the UN, but at the same time bought up all the vaccines. So there was no Moderna biotech available actually to buy for COVAX. To date, even the medical personnel in many poor countries is not vaccinated. Meanwhile, the global south has become a huge testing ground over whether herd immunity will work and a breeding ground for new virus variants.
Meskipun banyak negara Atlantik Utara membayar dana vaksin COVAX yang seharusnya memasok negara-negara yang tidak mampu membeli Namun dengan demikian negara-negara yang sama membeli sendiri semua dosis yang tersedia. Jika sekali lagi diskusi tentang mendistribusikan vaksin dan lain-lainnya menjadi tidak berguna. Sampai saat ini bahkan tenaga medis di banyak negara miskin tidak divaksin. Sementara itu di belahan bumi selatan telah menjadi tempat pengujian mengenai apakah herd immunity akan bekerja dan tempat pengembangan biaknya untuk vaksin virus yang baru.
So the ethical questions that matter most for social activists and NGOs, corrupt politicians and states don't care, are first, how far are the hygiene concepts of the West transferable to the South, where many people share a single room and have limited access to water? Social distancing and regular hand washing is not feasible. Masks were a rare good also in the West at the beginning. In the South, even medical personnel did not have access to it. Lockdowns hit day workers badly, as we could observe in India and many other countries. We would rather die of COVID than of hunger, was an often heard outcry.
Pertanyaan etis yang sangat penting bagi aktivis sosial dan LSM. Yang pertama, seberapa jauh konsep higienitas Barat dapat dialihkan ke selatan, di mana banyak orang berbagi satu kamar dan memiliki akses terbatas pada air. Jadi air itu terbatas, lalu menjaga jarak sosial dan mencuci tangan secara tidak teratur tidak dapat dilakukan. Masker adalah barang langka juga yang pada waktu itu di barat. Lalu kemudian di selatan bahkan tenaga medis tidak memiliki akses ke sana. Pengujian pada dampak buruk pada pekerjaan harian seperti yang kita amati di India, banyak negara lain juga. Kami lebih baik mati, banyak yang mengatakan bahwa kami lebih baik mati karena COVID daripada karena kelaparan. Itu adalah salah satu protes yang terdengar.
So, as a matter of fact, the German government has bought so many vaccines that we will have to throw them away now because they will expire. Yeah? While in Indonesia, you only had access to the Chinese vaccines.
Lalu di Indonesia kenapa kita menggunakan Chinese vaksin?
Ya, jadi rupanya misalnya di Jerman disampaikan bahwa banyak sekali vaksin yang tidak terpakai dan akhirnya kadaluarsa. Ya. Belum sempat didistribusi, ini menjadi ironi karena banyak negara miskin tidak mendapatkan akses ke vaksin. Bahkan akhirnya mereka mengatakan lebih baik kami, misalnya di India karena ada kebijakan lockdown, mereka tidak bisa kemana-mana tapi tidak divaksin. Akhirnya mereka bilang lebih baik kami mati daripada kami kelaparan. Nah, menarik untuk membandingkan apa yang Prof bilang, vaksin yang expired kadaluarsa di Barat, di Jerman, dibandingkan di Indonesia sepertinya tidak kedengaran vaksin yang expired. Mungkin ada tapi kasusnya hanya sedikit.
So, as a matter of fact, if the West is not willing to do it out of solidarity, they should have done it actually out of mere egoism, sharing the vaccines. Yeah, so I would expect them to share the vaccines. But if they don't do it out of a spirit of solidarity, they still should do it out of mere egoism.
Iya, jadi Prof mau mengungkapkan soal semangat solidaritas yang seharusnya itu diambil pada saat mendistribusikan, membagikan vaksin, tetapi seringkali itu terhambat karena masih ada semacam egoisme mementingkan diri sendiri.
All our efforts in vaccinating large parts of our national populations, especially the risk groups and medical personnel, are in vain, as long as the virus can spread and mutate in the global south without any immune response. UN General Secretary Antonio
realized. So what does realized eschatology mean? It means in Jesus Christ, God, the reign of God has already begun, but at the same time it's not yet. So we are living already in the times where God is present in Jesus Christ, but we are also waiting for God to come.
Ya, jadi dalam istilah Kristen, Pantopia membawa eskatologi yang telah dinyatakan ke dalam dunia saat ini. Kristus Yesus sudah datang dan bekerja saat ini, lalu kemudian masih kita akan nantikan kedatangannya kembali. Jadi sudah sedang akan.
Now, if it comes to intercultural theology, I'm working with three imperatives. The first one is the hermeneutical imperative. That means we have to interpret the text in the light of the context.
Teologi lintas budaya setidaknya memiliki tiga imperatif hermeneutis mengandaikan bahwa teologi kontekstual mesti dikembangkan dalam lingkaran hermeneutis antara teks dan konteks.
The second one is what I call the identificatory imperative. This is based on the dangerous memory of cross and resurrection of Jesus Christ. In the Memoria Passionis, it also encompasses the memory of the victims of the pandemic. What I experience at the moment in Germany is people say, oh, after 2 years, finally the pandemic is over. But nobody wants to talk about what has happened to us. Nobody really remembers those who have died of the pandemic.
Organisasi Kristen dan Muslim itu berkampanye untuk mengusahakan vaksinasi.
Yeah, so even though the Indonesian Christian churches in many parts of the country are in a minority situation, they really responded in creative ways as Christians to the pandemic. So this is what I call the dialogical imperative, to go out and be in dialogue with others, also with people from other religions, to work together and to create Pantopia.
Contoh-contoh tadi itu yang disebut dengan dialog kebebasan, dialogue liberation, dan itu membantu apa yang disebut dengan Pantopia.
I come to my last point in the part on Pantopia, which I called strategies. In his classic Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paulo Freire draws on his experience with the literacy campaigns in his home country, Brazil. By identifying generative words and themes in the community, which then became the first words people learned to read and write, they became at the same time conscientized of their context.
While in Indonesia, that would be a generative word would be probably rice or water. And that would be, or here in Toraja, probably buffalo. Yeah? So these are the words that are central to your particular context, and that's the first word you start.
Dalam pendidikan bagi kaum bertindas, Paulo Freire mengacu pada pengalamannya untuk melakukan kampanye literasi di Brasil, negara asalnya, dengan mengidentifikasi kata-kata maupun tema tersebut dalam masyarakat, yang kemudian menjadi kata-kata pertama yang dipelajari oleh mereka yang membaca maupun menulis, sekaligus menyadarkan akan konteks mereka. Contohnya kita di Toraja, kita sadar misalnya kerbau itu menjadi particular konteks bagi orang Toraja.
So this idea of generative words and themes has become very important to me when I do theology. So my question always is, what are the generative words and themes in a given moment? So in the context of the pandemic, for instance, it's health, it's hygiene. And around these concepts then you develop a theology. Then you also look at the Bible, health, Jesus was a healer. So Jesus was somebody who came and healed the people.
Iya, jadi ini perlu kita perhatikan bahwa penting untuk memperhatikan istilah-istilah generatif atau tema-tema dalam konteks kita masing-masing, partikular konteks kita. Kalau kita mau membangun teologi kontekstual atau lintas budaya, mencari apa yang ada di balik tema atau istilah-istilah itu, lalu kemudian misalnya kita perhatikan bagaimana Yesus di dalam Alkitab dinyatakan sebagai tabib, orang
So this has always been very important to me since then. What is the subjectivity, the subjecthood of the people? How can they maintain their subjecthood now in the pandemic, for instance? And this includes also those who have been victims of the pandemic. We have to remember the names of those who died of the pandemic.
ya ini terkait dengan kita melihat subjek bagian yang terakhir, karena bagian terakhir itu ialah bagaimana kita mengingat orang-orang yang meninggal karena pandemi.
And we have also to be in solidarity with those who have been affected most by the pandemic economically.
Dan spiritualitas solidaritas itu misalnya kemudian sangat berpengaruh terhadap bagaimana sistem ekonomi.
Pantopia is an alternative to the neoliberal new normal, it is an imaginative space that becomes real when people live out their subjecthood. Yeah? So Pantopia only comes into existence if we imagine it.
Pantopia sebagai alternatif dari new normal neoliberal merupakan ruang imajinatif yang menjadi nyata ketika orang-orang itu menghayati subjektivitas mereka.
And that means we have to become subjects of our own history. We have to fight against the neoliberal occupation of our religious spaces. Churches, but also in other religions, mosques and temples have to become liberative spaces again.
Kita harus menjadi subjek dari sejarah kita, termasuk dalam mengatasi pandemi, baik sebagai gereja, orang Kristen maupun juga agama-agama yang lain.
Still, we are in an interstitial space between the already and the not yet. Realized eschatology nurtures the hope that the reign of God, the realization of God's justice, has already begun with Jesus walking the earth, who instructed his disciples, and I end with a quote from the Gospel of Luke, "Go and tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, the poor have good news, preach to them."
Kita berada dalam ruang peralihan antara sudah dan belum. Eskatologi yang dinyatakan di satu sisi berbicara tentang harapan bahwa pemerintahan kerajaan Allah dan keadilan Allah telah dimulai pada saat Yesus itu berjalan di bumi, yang memerintahkan kepada murid-muridnya, "Pergilah, ceritakanlah kepada Yohanes apa yang telah kamu lihat dan kamu dengar. Orang buta melihat, orang lumpuh berjalan, orang kusta ditahirkan, orang tuli mendengar, orang mati dibangkitkan, orang miskin Lukas 7 ayat 22, orang miskin itu dianggap sebagai orang yang beruntung.
Cannot only go for the interest of the black community, you also have to go for the interest of the Hispanic and the Indian community. Yeah, so that means in the moment where only each group goes for its own right, the chance is very big that the system plays you all against each other. So the neoliberal capitalism wins if we are not in solidarity.
Ya, jadi tentang solidaritas yang Anda tadi tanyakan, beliau katakan bahwa solidaritas itu bukan berarti kita hanya mengikuti interest dari grup atau komunitas kita sendiri, tetapi kita juga ikut dengan interest dari komunitas yang lain, seperti beliau tadi memberikan contoh di barat, misalnya orang in black community, orang dia kulit hitam, mereka juga harus have interest dengan komunitas yang lain, karena kapan kita akan dikalahkan oleh neoliberalism, right? The neoliberalism kapitalism akan menang jika kita tidak punya solidaritas. Jadi jika kita hanya terkurung dalam komunitas kita sendiri, kapitalisme neoliberal akan menang. Jika kita hanya berfokus pada komunitas kita dan kita tidak melihat interest dari komunitas yang lain, itu berbicara tentang
The readings that illness is a punishment, but it also shows that Jesus is a healer. Yeah? And my wife is Old Testament scholar, so she brought into the discussion lament. Yeah? You lament in front of God. Why do you allow this suffering? Why am I infected by COVID? Why is my mother infected by COVID and dies? So lament is a very important theological concept in the discussion on the pandemic. So I'm not saying it's either punishment or not punishment by God, but I'm saying the Bible itself leads the way that we can argue with God, why is this illness there?
Jadi Prof lompat ke pertanyaan keempat dari penanya pertama tadi, untuk juga masih ada kaitan dengan pertanyaan pertama. Yang diajukan dan penting bagi kita ialah ketika kita mengalami penderitaan ataupun juga misalnya terkena pandemi, apakah ini merupakan hukuman dari Allah? Kalau kita perhatikan misalnya ratapan, kita beratapan kan itu berisi bagaimana kita bertanya kepada Allah atau kepada Tuhan ketika kita berada dalam situasi yang sulit, menderita, dan juga termasuk ketika kita terdampak dari pandemi. Ya. Ini akan lain misalnya ketika kita menyadari ternyata Alkitab atau Injil menggambarkan Yesus sebagai seorang penyembuh, tabib, a healer. Tentu pertanyaan, apakah kondisi pandemi saya terinfeksi virus itu merupakan penghukuman Allah atau bagaimana? Ini sekaligus sebenarnya kalau dikembangkan menjadi solidaritas, spirit solidaritas, tidak hanya yang di permukaan saja, yang dangkal, tetapi melampaui solidaritas yang disebut dengan solidaritas neoliberal. Kalau solidaritas neoliberal, kita hanya memperhatikan kepentingan grup atau kelompok kita. Seharusnya kita beyond, melampaui. Kita juga harus memperhatikan kepentingan dari kelompok-kelompok di luar kelompok kita. Di Amerika misalnya, tidak hanya memperhatikan kepentingan atau suara-suara dari mereka yang dalam komunitas orang kulit hitam, tapi kita juga perlu mendengarkan atau memperhatikan kepentingan dan solidar kepada kelompok lain, Hispanik dan orang-orang India yang juga mengalami penderitaan-penderitaan dalam kehidupan sosial mereka.
So it was actually only on the right margin of the churches, the fundamentalist churches, and also on the very far right of Islam, fundamentalistic Islam, where religious people spoke about the pandemic as a punishment of God. It was not in the mainline churches this time. But as I said, you can find arguments in the Bible for this, but the stronger arguments, in my view, are to argue with God about what is happening to us. Now, the very same groups who were speaking about the punishment were also the ones who were using apocalyptic language in a very frightening way. It's the end of the days. Now, my attempt was to say, if I read the apocalyptic texts, even though we are in a situation of crisis, they point to something new. Yeah, and that's the way I read these texts, that there is a new vision of something that is coming. And for me, I coined the term Pantopia, yeah, as a thing that I want to get out of this crisis with a new vision. And that vision is against the neoliberal capitalism that we are all suffering from, and against fundamentalism that we are suffering from.
Iya, jadi memang ada grup-grup dalam kekristenan maupun agama lain yang fundamentalism yang melihat bahwa pandemi itu adalah penghukuman dari Tuhan. Tapi sebaiknya kita tidak berpikir demikian. Sebaliknya kita mencari banyak jawaban yang bisa kita refleksikan dari teks-teks Alkitab.
And your last question, democracy. I mean, even in Germany, the Chancellor was only reigning with a small group of people, so the parliament was also in lockdown. And I don't like that, because it gives too much power to a small group of people. And in other places in the world, like in Latin America, in some countries, they use the lockdown to get rid of political opposition. I heard also in the Philippines. So in the lockdown, it's easier to say, oh, you violated the lockdown. So the democracy is a very high good. And I think it has become very vulnerable also through the 2 years of the pandemic. And people in power have been misusing the situation to concentrate too much power in their hand. So that's why for me this idea of subjecthood of people is so important. Subjecthood. Next question.
Oke, pertanyaan yang kedua. Sudah menghilang ya? Dari sebelah sana tadi ya, pertanyaan kedua. Silakan. Ya, silakan.
Ya, terima kasih. Saya akan bertanya dalam bahasa Indonesia, mungkin Bapak Ibu dosen bisa membantu saya menerjemahkan. Yang ingin saya tanyakan, bagaimana menjelaskan kepada orang Kristen yang bertanya di mana keadilan dan keberadaan Tuhan ketika mereka menghadapi tantangan di mana virus, kelaparan, kematian, ketidakadilan dan trauma melanda secara bersamaan, sedangkan mereka merasa telah berdoa setiap saat. Terima kasih.
So the question is how to explain to Christian people where is God, the existence of God, and the justice from God, whereas there's still many masih ada banyak there's still many virus and also trauma. Okay, there's still many poor people and hunger everywhere. So how to respond and explain to Christian people?
Well, the question you are raising, in traditional theology we have a term for that, and that is theodicy. Why does God allow suffering? That points also a bit in the direction of the question that you raised about punishment. So the easy way out is to say, well, we have a God that is punishing us. That's at least not my image I have of God. But still, we have to tackle with the question that you raise, why does then God allow the suffering? So one way of dealing with this is Christology, And there are two ways. One is God himself, herself, went into suffering on the cross until death. God suffered on the cross and then was resurrected. Now Jürgen Moltmann, that's a very famous German theologian, spoke about the crucified God and said God is suffering in his Son. He is suffering in the fact that his Son is dying on the cross. Now feminist theologians said, what kind of father slaughters his own son? So there is also critique on this idea. Johann Baptist Metz, the Catholic theologian that I quoted, he says, we suffer because of God. We bring our suffering in front of God. We raise exact the question to God that you raised. Why, God, do you allow this? Or as Jesus Christ said on the cross, according to the Gospel of Mark, why have you forsaken me? So I think if we take seriously our Christian faith, we have to learn to deal with these dilemmas, that there is no easy answer, but that we can at least bring our lament in front of God. And that we can have the hope that God is present among our suffering, and that's why this image of Jesus suffering, still having the connection to the respirator, is so important. Because what tells this image is, God is present in our suffering. He's not the cause of our suffering. She is present in our suffering.
Okay.
But it's an important question, yeah? We struggle with this.
Jadi tadi beliau sampaikan bahwa pertanyaan why God allows kita mengalami suffering, jadi tadi nyambung dengan pertanyaan dari penanya yang pertama mengenai punishment, tentang hukuman yang tadi. Jadi kenapa Tuhan mengizinkan kita mengalami banyak hal-hal yang tidak baik menurut pandangan kita. Kita perlu tadi disampaikan oleh beliau, lamen, terus meratap kepada Tuhan, datang kepada Tuhan dan merenungkan apa yang kita sedang alami. Kita perlu merenungkan God suffering, penderitaan Tuhan dari cross, dari salib sampai kematian. Dan kemudian kita datang kepada Tuhan, lament to God, meratap kepada Tuhan dan menghayati itu supaya muncul image of the Jesus Christ, bahwa Tuhan itu hadir di dalam penderitaan kita. Jadi itu mengapa Tuhan mengizinkan penderitaan itu terjadi dalam kehidupan kita. Ya, cara kita merespon dan merefleksi itu juga kita melihat penderitaan yang sudah dilalui oleh Jesus Christ. Mau dilanjutkan?
Iya, pertanyaan ini terkait dalam satu istilah yaitu teodisi atau keadilan kemahakuasaan Allah, di mana Allah pada saat kita mengalami penderitaan. Secara singkat tadi saya mendengarkan Allah itu hadir bersama-sama dengan kita dalam penderitaan kita. Allah, gambaran Yesus yang berbela rasa, itu merupakan gambaran bahwa Allah solidar dengan penderitaan umat manusia. Beliau mengusulkan bagaimana supaya kita datang menyampaikan seluruh ratapan kita ketika kita mengalami penderitaan kepada Allah. Tapi Allah tidak meninggalkan orang percaya di dalam penderitaannya sendiri, melainkan Dia hadir. Dan itu juga menjadi salah satu poin pertanyaan pertama, Allah yang solidar, Allah yang turut menderita. John Seng kan? Allah yang turut menderita. Itu mungkin bisa nanti dibaca.
Ya, baik, the next question, pertanyaan yang ketiga dari sini tadi. Silakan.
Terima kasih atas kesempatan yang diberikan kepada saya. Nama saya Tulis Sevin. Pertanyaan saya akan saya sampaikan dalam bahasa Indonesia. Mungkin Ibu dosen bisa membantu saya untuk menyampaikannya kepada Profesor. Nah, pertanyaan saya mengenai tentang materi yang disampaikan oleh Profesor tadi, bahwa dalam lingkungan kita, dalam dunia ini banyak ketidakadilan penindasan yang terjadi. Nah, langsung saja pertanyaan saya, bagaimana etika yang baik dan cara kita untuk menghadapi pandemi yang kita alami dalam sudut pandang Kristen. Terima kasih.
Okay, thank you, Sul. So the question from Sul is, she said that in our life we always deal with face the injustice, and there are many suffering and things that is not what we want. And then the question is, what is our good ethical or our response or our attitude to deal with all the bad things that happen from the Christian perspective?
Well, a good friend of mine, Miguel de la Torre, he's a Hispanic theologian from the US, and we have been teaching together a course in Germany. He speaks about a theology of hopelessness. So this is, of course, in Christian ears very provocative, because there is this famous book in German by Jürgen Moltmann again, Theology of Hope. And in systematic theology in Germany, there is a certain tendency these days to speak of the loving God. But through my engagement with liberation theology and also with the question of fundamentalism and terror, I think we also have to learn to face the dark side of God. Yeah, so again, like with the question of the other student, as Christian theologians, unfortunately, we don't always have the easy answers. Yeah? But there's always a good news also in the middle of bad news. And the good news again is that God is also present in this suffering. And that God has given us life to develop ourselves. And if we all look at our own lives, there are also not only moments of suffering, but there are also moments of joy. So I think we also have to learn to develop a theology of joy in the middle of all suffering. Yeah? But, you know, I mean, that also is a question of social location. I happen to be born as a professor in a German university. That's another social location than somebody who has been thrown into a slum. And there is this idea that every human being has a dignity that is beyond the social location. That is this idea of subjecthood. And one of my deepest experience when I was a student in Korea was I came to a camp of people who have been drawn out of their houses by the government because they wanted to build new apartments. So where they were living in tents is around the Catholic Cathedral in the middle of Seoul. So I came to visit their tent, and then they said, sorry that we cannot offer you food. And I was deeply touched by that. Yeah, because I think, well, they have other things to worry about than to offer me food. But that showed to me, on the other hand, a deep sense of human being and community. Sharing food is a very important thing, also in the Christian tradition. I always refer to this experience as a Eucharistic experience.
Ya, yang pertama, Profesor mengatakan bahwa pertanyaan ini tidak mudah untuk dijawab. Beliau mengungkapkan ada dua model teologi, yaitu teologi tanpa harapan, dan itu kebalikan dari apa yang Moltmann sebut sebagai teologi of hope. Memang kita tidak menyangkal adanya penderitaan dalam kehidupan kita, tetapi kita juga tidak berhenti di situ. Tapi bagaimana kita hidup juga dalam sukacita. Jadi kita hidup, kita menemukan sukacita di dalam penderitaan. Beliau tadi menceritakan pengalaman ketika di Korea Selatan melakukan studi Minjung. Jadi ada beberapa orang yang harus diusir dari apartemen mereka dan hidup di dalam tenda-tenda. Ketika Prof mengunjungi mereka, justru Prof itu sangat tersentuh dengan pernyataan dari orang-orang yang hidup di tenda itu bahwa, oh, kami sangat minta maaf karena kami tidak bisa menyiapkan makanan untuk Anda. Seharusnya kita yang mengunjunginya lah yang membawakan makanan, tetapi justru yang terjadi, orang yang sudah berada dalam situasi yang kita sebut suffering, tapi masih bisa memikirkan orang lain di luar diri mereka. Nah, dalam arti tertentu, itu yang disebut bagaimana mereka menemukan sukacita sekalipun di dalam situasi menderita. Paling tidak itu men-challenge kita untuk mengatakan atau menemukan apa yang Anda pertanyakan sebagai bagaimana etika Kristen di tengah konteks penderitaan yang ada di sekitar kita. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Itu pertanyaan yang ketiga. Selanjutnya kita akan ke pertanyaan yang keempat. Oke, in the middle.
Thank you, sir, for giving me time to ask some questions. My name is IKAT, lecturer at Toraja State Christian Institute. I want to ask, what do you think about crises that are still happening in the world? After all, there are many thoughts about solving the problems of the world crisis. Discrimination still occurs and crimes still occurs as before, including wars. Including that's happened as a result of COVID-19. Discrimination occurred among human on the ground or spreading fires that are easy transmitted. Because we know that even though a vaccine has been found in limited quantities, it still can help deal with pandemic. And I often find rumors circulation about money politics that are happening in the medical sector in connection with this pandemic. What is your opinion, sir? Thank you.
Yeah. So if I got Your question has two aspects. One is discrimination is still happening, and the second one is there is a lot of corruption also involved in the pandemic. Yeah, that's two things I also pointed out in my lecture. I mean, even in Germany, we had politicians who were involved in money making with buying masks at tremendous prices. And I think there should be, after the pandemic, official commission who is looking into these things, because that's a good democratic practice, that the democratic system also controls itself. But I'm speaking now about the German case. I don't see that happening. So the very same people who were involved in transfer of medical goods at overpriced rates are still in political function. Only a few people in the lower ranks of the political system were actually expelled from their positions. And this is not only true for Germany, but that's also true in other parts of the world. Yeah, so that medical goods are transported somewhere to help people, and then they, instead of getting to the people, are sold by corrupt politicians, military police, or whatsoever. That is a problem, and I think that's why I was arguing one of the key issues in dealing with the pandemic is the question of democracy. And the other thing indeed is what the virus has pointed out is this multiple discrimination of people. So if you are discriminated for racial, gender, sexual, your social location, you most likely also are more affected by the pandemic than others. And that's something we have to point out, and I said we should not cover this up, but we should really have a forum to discuss what went wrong and what did we do good during the pandemic. And to my frustration, I'm afraid that is not going to happen.
Ya, saya tidak akan menerjemahkan kalimat per kalimat, tapi paling tidak poinnya ini mengapa masih ada isu money politik dan juga isu mengenai bagaimana vaksin didistribusi, padahal sudah tahu berada di dalam situasi pandemi, kira-kira begitu ya. Dalam kuliah tadi, Prof menyampaikan bahwa pandemi itu semakin menelanjangi soal ketidakadilan. Ya. Dan ketidakadilan tidak hanya bicara terkait dengan kekuasaan, ada para politisi yang korup, tapi juga bagaimana vaksin itu bisa diakses dalam hal ini distribusi. Jadi ada dua yang ditelanjangi oleh pandemi itu sendiri, ialah bagaimana kekuasaan itu, ketidakadilan terkait dengan kekuasaan dan ketidakadilan terkait dengan ekonomi, harga obat yang semakin meninggi dan lain sebagainya, justru menghilangkan aspek dari bagaimana supaya orang lain itu bisa hidupnya dipertahankan. Kurang lebih seperti itu. Mohon maaf kalau tidak terlalu pas menjawab, karena pertanyaan Anda juga tadi agak panjang. Oke, makasih.
Ya, terima kasih. Kita berbicara mengenai ketidakadilan, penindasan, kemiskinan bukan hanya hari ini dan bukan hanya pada saat kita mengalami yang namanya pandemi. Pada mula-mula permasalahan ini sudah ada, gitu. Ya. Dalam landasan teori teologi pembebasan, bagaimana Allah menolong membebaskan bangsa Israel pada saat ia mengalami yang namanya tekanan pada saat dia berada di Mesir, dan bagaimana juga Yesus melindungi orang-orang yang termarginalkan pada saat ia hadir dalam dunia. Berbicara mengenai ketidakadilan, kemiskinan, saya beranggapan ini adalah bentuk dari keseimbangan semesta, karena itu adalah bagian dari mana bisa saja Allah menunjukkan bahwa itu adalah bagian dari eksistensinya untuk tidak menghilangkan persoalan ini. Karena sifat manusia bisa saja tidak akan mengingat lagi Tuhan ketika kebahagiaan itu dia capai seperti itu. Untuk itu Allah mengizinkan penderitaan itu. Tetapi kita mencoba untuk memahami masalah seperti ini dan bahkan tidak selesai seperti itu. Bisakah berikan saya suatu pemahaman yang bisa saya pegang kuat untuk ke depan seperti untuk menjalani atau melihat fenomena seperti ini? Terima kasih.
Thank you. Can you bisa repeat yang paling terakhir, pertanyaan paling terakhir, bagian terakhir, kalimat terakhir? Understanding about what?
Berikan pemahaman kuat yang bisa kita pegang untuk melihat suatu masalah kemiskinan, penderitaan.
Okay, thank you. So the question is actually there at the beginning. We already face many suffering and face many problems, and then he talks about the liberal teology pembebasan, that how God helped the Israel from suffering and also as the marginal community, kaum marginal, and then he asked in the last question. He want a professor to give him understanding, to strengthen his understanding to deal with all the problems that will exist. Yeah, so there is already many problems, and there are still many problems until today. And he asked how to strengthen his understanding to deal with all the problems.
Well, that's why at the beginning I said I'm going back to look into the different liberation theologies, how they have dealt with particular issues in order to see what tools can they provide to deal with the current crisis of the pandemic. And if I look back, then I would say there are also success stories to tell. Latin American liberation theology fought against the military dictatorships. Black theology in South Africa fought against apartheid. Minjung theology in South Korea fought against the military dictatorships. These are all examples of Christian liberation movements who stood with the people and who have been successful in a way. But it's a thorny road. And that's why I'm saying, looking back, how these liberation theologies have struggling with their context. I think what we need in the pandemic is also a kind of liberation theology that tackles the issues that we have been also now addressing in these questions. Yeah? How can we build up solidarity? How can we strengthen democracy? How can we deal with discrimination and corruption? So there is a function of Christian intellectuals to speak up. And that's why I said it's so the idea of Kuliah and KERJA of occupy religion is a very important one. Because what they are saying is we should gain back our religious spaces that also have already been occupied by neoliberal capitalism. Yeah? Think about prosperity gospel, or think about petro-Islam. Then you can see that religions have already been in the grip of the capitalist system. So we as Christian intellectuals have always speak up against it. But it's an ongoing. There is this Latin American liberation theologian who wrote a book, La Lucha Continua, that the struggle goes on. So it's not after the struggle as before the struggle. That's a bit of a situation, I think. And how to come back to your question, how to celebrate life in the midst of suffering. And I think that's possible.
Iya, jadi di awal kuliah tadi Prof sudah mengungkapkan mengenai beberapa jenis teologi pembebasan. Ada teologi pembebasan Amerika Latin yang berhadapan dengan kekuatan militer, teologi teologi hitam di Afrika yang melawan sistem apartheid, lalu kemudian teologi Minju di Korea yang juga berhadapan dengan diktator militer dan lain sebagainya. Itu memperlihatkan bahwa jenis-jenis teologi liberasi atau teologi pembebasan itu berhadapan dengan particular konteks dan ingin menjawab atau merespon konteksnya masing-masing. Lalu kemudian beliau mengangkat mengenai bagaimana kita membangun teologi pembebasan berhadapan dengan pandemi. Tentu semuanya tadi seperti yang Anda katakan betul bahwa di dalamnya ada ketidakadilan dan penindasan, walaupun berbeda-beda masing-masing berdasarkan konteksnya. Prof dibantu oleh pemikiran dari Kuliah yang occupy religion, yang mana dia melihat bahwa dalam agama-agama dan khususnya kekristenan, jangan-jangan di belakang itu sudah ada neoliberal yang mengkooptasi atau mengokupasi agama itu sendiri, ya. Contoh teologi kemakmuran itu kalau kita pelajari di belakangnya ada semacam pengaruh neoliberal di dalamnya. Justru dengan kuliah kali ini itu yang ingin disampaikan oleh Prof, bukannya memberikan semacam penjelasan tapi membantu kita untuk sadar bahwa kita perlu membebaskan agama kita atau kekristenan kita dari kungkungan kuasa neoliberal yang tanpa kita sadari. Dan itu akan membantu kita semakin bisa merespon konteks kita, memperlihatkan etika solidaritas kita, dan tidak hanya membicarakan eskatologi sebagai utopia, melainkan kita sudah bisa merealisasikannya pada saat ini dalam bentuk etika. Ya. Kan kalau kita bicara eskatologi seolah-olah hanya bicara tentang nanti di masa yang akan datang. Padahal dengan Pantopia sebenarnya itu bisa. Sekaligus Pantopia adalah bentuk sangkahan terhadap istilah new normal yang sebenarnya dibalik gagasan new normal itu terselip gagasan neolib di belakang. Terima kasih. Selanjutnya pertanyaan berikutnya, Ibu Karnia, yang open lecture in Iakn Toraja.
Silakan Pak.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Reverend Andrew. From your speech, 3 words very important. You highlighted, and I very interested in the words Pantopia. That highlights that we are the subjects. That's a very interesting words. But I just curious about the Syrian refugee in Germany. As you mentioned before, that how does the church do mission to them? The Syrian refugee from Syria. That's all my question. Jadi saya bertanya soal apa ya? Di Jerman itu banyak sekali pengungsi dari Syria dan bagaimana gereja melaksanakan misi kepada mereka. Dan saya menggarisbawahi 3 kata ini yang paling penting bagi saya adalah soal Pantopia itu, di mana kita adalah subjek. Kita adalah subjek di dalam teologi. Nah, itu saja.
Well, actually, the churches are doing a lot in dealing with the refugees. They were at the forefront, different from dealing with the pandemic. Yeah? So I think if it comes to pandemic, we still have to do our homework to ask what went wrong. As far as, I mean, I was in the IKAT chamber on migration, and I was even a bit critical about the way they were acting, because there was no critical dealing with the question of Islamic fundamentalism. Yeah? And so when Germany decided to take a lot of refugees from Syria, Saudi Arabia offered to build 200 mosques in Germany. Yeah? And of course to also send preachers. So I would have wished we would have also had if you have interreligious dialogue, you should also be able to talk about interreligious conflicts, and you should address these issues. And sometimes I have the feeling we are now very afraid to do this. And one of my argument was that in many ways, even liberal Muslims who are living in Germany were not happy with many things that were happening.
But maybe in practical ways, how we do Pantopia theology in our theological style.
Well, I mean, I tried to identify a few pathways. One is to do contextual theology, to really always address the text from the perspective of the context and the context from the perspective of the text, to be relevant, to identify always the signs of the times. Second one is to
thought present in this particular situation. That was also the question of theodicy, of course. And the third one is this whole idea of being in community and being dialogical. And dialogical does not mean for me to close our eyes to conflict. But we have to address the conflicts that are there. Because interreligious dialogue sometimes is nice people meet nice people in nice places. And that's not the idea.
Oke, mungkin saya jelaskan. Jadi saya tadi bertanya soal bagaimana secara praktis kita berteologi dalam istilah Pantopia itu dalam dunia teologi. Jadi yang selalu diperhatikan adalah soal konteks kita, dialog antar religius, sehingga dalam hal ini kita juga harus memperhatikan soal apa krisis kita sekarang dan bagaimana menangani itu secara bersama. Nah itu jadi kita jelaskan.
Thank you for this time. Hello, I'm Karnia. Maybe my question is not very related about this topic, but when I hear the topic Pandemonium Pandemethics, I remember I remember something that I have been thinking about liquid church member. The liquid church member phenomenon. I'm interested about the phenomenon of liquid church member in period and in after pandemic. Liquid church member is the phenomenon when people can access the worship from the other church in different denomination, and people to be liquid. And my question is, what if the things to be culture after pandemic, or maybe there is an ethics for this context? Mungkin saya jelaskan lagi teman bahasa Indonesia nanti bisa diingat. Jadi kalau misalnya gereja itu menjadi lebih liquid gitu, jadi di masa pandemi ini kan kita bisa mengakses gereja-gereja, ibadah-ibadah gereja lain dari berbagai denominasi, lalu kemudian kita menjadi lebih liquid gitu. Apakah misalnya kalau cara bergereja ke depan akan seperti itu? Apakah semestinya ada etika jadi terkait pandemic ini? Is there any ethics for this context, or atau bagaimana dalam upaya Pantopia yang tadi tumbang nilai-nilai kerajaan Allah kurang lebih seperti itu? Okay, thank you.
Well, you see, what I observed is indeed that people enjoyed the new possibilities of shopping in other churches, or we had to our book Pandemonium Pandemethics, we had a contribution from a Jewish scholar who says in the Jewish community people use their chance to go to synagogue in New York virtually, or go to synagogue in the Middle East and so on, and she praised that as a new freedom. Of course, when I come to contexts like Korea, where everything is based on the money that is given every Sunday, and the virtual worship services led to the fact that 15,000 small churches didn't survive the pandemic because they were too little and the pastor couldn't live because there was no Sunday service where the members would give money to the church. And now the experience is, I hear that everywhere, that people say, well, you know, why should I go to church on Sunday if I just can look on the internet, it's easier. Yeah? Well, I don't know whether that's I think that's first of all, that's also a question of how has the pandemic changed our ways of life? I mean, if you ask our secretaries at the universities, they don't want to go back to office. They have learned to enjoy to work from home. But as a matter of fact, it will be helpful if they show up every once in a while also in the office. So it's not only in the religious sphere, but it's also in the secular sphere that people have changed their lifestyles. And I don't think that you can force them to go back to church. So that's, and that has, that has led to a certain decrease of membership. That has probably also led that people saw, oh, that other church is more attractive to me than this church. I don't think that, well, if my secretary doesn't show up, I can tell her, well, you're an employee, so you should be at least 50% in the office and 50% you can work from home. But if you don't show up in church, you cannot say, there's no way to force people to come back to your church if they enjoy another church, or force them to come back on Sunday into the church when they want to watch from home. So you can of course say, oh, the pandemic is over, so no more virtual worship service, but I'm afraid there will be a lot of churches who will offer virtual worship service. So I understand your question, but I think that has really also a cultural factor. And it's also, I realize that myself, that I think, why should I go to a meeting of 15 minutes in person when we can have that easily in between online? So there will be certain things that just will stay online because we have discovered that saves us a lot of time and energy. So the pandemic is also not over in the way it has affected our general life situation. But the question that I was raising, and in a certain sense relates to what you are asking, is that it has also affected our life in a way that has been traumatic, and that we have to address. Because otherwise, in 10 years' time, we will have people who still suffer from these experiences of isolation and being alone.
Okay, thank you. The first simple question. What do you think, Professor, about pandemic, especially 22 or 19? Is it a curse or blessing?
Blessing. Curse or blessing?
Yeah. Of course, in your subject, as missiolog, and then we hope, Professor, that we get public lecture material. We get your material, and then we will translate, and then we share to lecture and staff and our student. And the second, our closing statement as a family Toraja, the Iakn Toraja family. Once again, I would like, and we would like to say thank you for your coming. You're coming in Toraja, Toraja, then your material about topic Pandemonium Pandemethics and Pantopia. Yeah. We believe the topic is beneficial for state Christian institutional IKN Toraja. And then we pray that you success in your activity. God bless you in your activity. Then maybe next time we meet you. The last, we apologize that we are lacking this program. From the leader and the different committee, we apologize about. Many are lacking this activity, this program. Once again, thank you for your coming. We apologize and we pray you always strong and healthy, and God bless you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your kind words. First of all, I think there's no reason to apologize. It was a great morning, and we managed the technical difficulties. We also managed the language difficulties. From the questions you raised, I could see that you understood very well what I tried to get across. So, of course, also for me, this was a very untypical way of a lecture by myself, because usually I use a lot of images and PowerPoint, but this is somehow the result of 2 years of research on the pandemic, so I produced the paper, so I brought the paper. Next time I come, I will bring a lot of images. So. But yeah, nevertheless, I think what I heard from your questions, I have the feeling we have a good intercultural interaction. Coming to your question, is the pandemic a curse or a blessing? I like, of course, provocative questions, so thank you for that. I mean, is it a curse? Well, that goes also in the direction of what several students have asked. Yeah, is it punishment, and why does God allow that? I'm coming from theology of the cross. I'm coming from this whole idea of memoria passionis, and so I'm coming from the idea that God is present in suffering. Yeah, so my answer to the curse would be, no, it's not good. It's not God's curse. It's a curse, and God is present in that. But we cannot think God in a way that we say everything we don't like is not by God. Then we would diminish God. So we have to deal with this question, why does God allow suffering? Yeah? And that's why, that's what I learned from my wife, who is an Old Testament scholar. This idea of lament is so important. I can argue with God. I can be angry with God. And Gethsemane for me has always been the image I can also have doubts about God. Is it a blessing? No, I wouldn't say so. But I think there will be certain things we have learned in the pandemic that can be also helpful to us in the future. Yeah? So the way of communication, we had very fast to learn to communicate digitally. Yeah? And today we communicate in a way that is quite different from, let's say, having Skype calls 10 years ago. It has become much more dynamic and interactive and so on. So in a way, that may be a blessing to us, that we have learned. But that's not, I wouldn't say the pandemic is a blessing, but the blessing is that we have learned to cope with certain challenges of the pandemic. And that is certainly one of them. So, of course, I went back immediately to teaching on site, but my wife and I said we will keep that one course in winter online that we taught on the pandemic, and now it will be called Salon Pantopia. So Salon is an idea that's coming somehow from the field of Schleiermacher. So intellectuals meet together in a private space and discuss. No, this is not a private space, this is an online space. But the idea is to bring together critical thinking, allow students not only from my university in Mainz, but also students who are sitting somewhere and who are working with me to share their ideas. So this is also something that came, through the experience of the pandemic. So that's, and I hope, that's my hope for the future, that we really will not only say the pandemic is over, let's go on with our life, but that we remember those who died, that we remember those who suffered, and that we tackle the injustices and the discrimination and the suffering that the virus has pointed out. Well, thank you for your kind words and thank you for having me here.
Mari beri tepuk tangan kepada I interested your last sentences. Memory not only about thinking, but praxis as well, right? Preferential option for the poor and the weakness, not only about thinking they are, but our presence among them, right? Okay, thank you for your coming, Professor. We gratitude for your presence here and deliver your public lecture. And this is a good opportunity for our cooperation in the future, personal and institutional as well. Hopefully like that. Oke, saya kembalikan ke MC.
Well, thank you so much for all the people that already asked questions and already answered by our professor. And thank you so much for Professor for bringing the lecture here about Pandemonium Pandemethics, Pantopia, what's in a word, and help us to understand how to respond pandemic. And there are many things that already exposed what actually happened in pandemic COVID-19. Thank you so much for all the knowledge and bring the new perspective to respond to COVID-19. Thank you so much, and may God always bless you and everything that you do, especially to do mission and go around the world, and also send our warm regards to your family. Yes, and thank you so much. Terima kasih untuk kita semua yang sudah memberikan waktu untuk hadir dalam kuliah umum pada saat ini. And now we will have as a token of appreciation from our institute to professor that will be given by our rector. Maybe in the front, please. This is our token of appreciation from our institute to our professor. you so much, Pak Rektor tetap di sana. There are one book, a work of our professor in Germany, dalam bahasa Jerman. Ya, dalam bahasa Jerman. Dan jika ada yang tertarik bisa menghubungi beliau.
Ini buku ya, buku persembahan dari profesor. Ini dalam bahasa Jerman. Translate this book ya. Jadi kita berharap buku ini akan langsung diterjemahkan lagi oleh Prof ke dalam bahasa bahasa Inggris ya, sebagai tindak lanjut dari MOU kita nanti dengan
kita bisa dari Inggris ke Indonesia.
Ya, Pak, bagus banget ya. Thank you so much. Ya. Mana ada orang perpustakaan di sini? Kalau ada orang perpustakaan silakan diambil sekalian. Ini karena ini diperuntukkan untuk orang perpustakaan ya. Oke, thank you.
Thank you so much. Ya baik, jadi materi yang disampaikan oleh beliau tadi itu baru akan dipublikasikan, jadi materi ini belum terpublish, jadi kami belum bisa share materinya, tapi beliau katakan tahun ini beliau berjanji akan mempublikasi itu. Iya, jadi belum bisa di-share. Kita beruntung karena kita sudah mendengarkan duluan.
Iya, bahkan beliau mempersilahkan kita untuk translate ke dalam bahasa Indonesia, tapi nanti tunggu sampai dipublish atau dicetak di Gema Duta Wacana. Jadi untuk saat ini belum bisa, karena itu beliau mengajak bagaimana kalau kalian terjemahkan ke dalam bahasa Indonesia lalu nanti itu dipublish di Gema Duta Wacana jurnal dari UKDW. Setelah itu baru bisa dibagikan untuk kita.
Okay, right. Once again, I want to say thank you for Mr. Professor Dr. H. Volker Guster for sharing with us. Thank you for the insight. We know you are a busy person. Thank you for taking time to come here. Thank you for Mrs. Ice Triana Lolon MA as a moderator today in this event public lecture. And then thank you for our interpreter, Mr. Dr. Salmon Pamantung and Miss Anissa Citra, Magister of Education. And then before we will continue to agenda, I would like to invite Rector of Institut Agama Kristen Negeri Toraja to take picture together with Vice Rector Reverend Dr. Abraham Sere Tanggulungan, Head of LPM, and Committee Chairman Dr. Salmon Pamantung, all of lecturer and all of committee. Please stand forward. Bergabung juga semua dosen dan seluruh panitia, kemudian tenaga kependidikan, dan setelah ini all of audience, semua peserta. Pak Setlon, Pak Efraim.
Di sana sebagai paper,